Hi everyone, and welcome to today's 4th grade informative writing lesson. Today we're working on section 2, lesson 25. My name is Mrs. Collum and I'll be your teacher for today's lesson. Let's start with a quick review. In the previous lessons, you learned how to analyze prompts. Remember, when analyzing prompts, you had to identify the keyword and then ask yourself what the prompt is asking you to write about. And then I wanted you to note if it's something general or something specific. Analyzing prompts is the very first step when you're starting to write an essay. You want to do this first before you even start planning. This is because there's many different types of writing. So before you start, you need to identify what type of writing you're going to be doing that day. The keywords in a prompt are what tell you that genre of writing. In the last few lessons, we went over those specific keywords for informative writing. Remember, it was explain or explanatory, inform or informative, and teach. If you see any of those keywords in a prompt, you know right away that it's an informative prompt and you'll be writing an informative essay. That's step 1. Step 2 is then to ask yourself, what is the prompt asking me to write about? There's always a main topic that the prompt is talking about. But then step 3 is where you really want to ask yourself, is it asking me to write about something general about the topic or something very specific about the topic? I'll give you an example from our last lesson. One of the prompts we talked about said, write to inform your reader about alligators. That's a general prompt. It's just asking you to write about anything as long as it has to do with alligators. You can pick any topics about alligators. But the second prompt we went over told you to inform your reader about why alligators are an endangered species. Now that prompt's a lot more specific. You can't just write anything about alligators. For that prompt, you need to write specifically topics about why alligators are an endangered species. Now, some prompts are general, some are very specific, and you never know which one you're going to get. That's why it's super important to make sure that you analyze the prompts and identify exactly what you're going to be writing about. Once you've identified the keyword, analyze the prompt, and you know what you're writing about, then it's time to start planning for the essay, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So for today, you're going to be planning for informative prompts in response to texts that you read. Now, informative reading is text-based writing. When I say text, I'm referring to passages, articles, and stories. These are all things that you're going to read prior to writing your essay. So for today, we're going to be planning for informative prompts based on exactly what we read. You're not going to be coming up with topics on your own anymore. You're going to be pulling topics from the text that you read. Let me show you a few examples. For informative writing, you're going to be given 2 to 4 passages to read about a similar topic or theme. What this means is sometimes you may get 2 passages, sometimes you may get 3 passages, or sometimes you may get 4 passages, but they're all going to have a similar topic or theme. After you read those passages, then you're going to read the prompt and it's going to tell you exactly what to write about. You are going to choose 3 topics from those passages to inform your reader about the prompt. Okay, so when you get your prompt, you're not just going to come up with topics anymore. You're going to go back into those passages and choose your topics from those passages. So let's say that you just read 3 passages on helping out in your community. Right after you were done, you were given this prompt. What would you do? Okay, so set the scene in your head. You just got done reading 3 passages and they were all about helping out in your community. Maybe they talked about picking up garbage in the community, helping with painting houses in the community, things like that. And then the prompt said, think about how you can make a difference in your community. Using information from the text, explain what work you would do and tell how this work would make a difference in your community. Now, for this prompt, you cannot just write about things that you want to do in your community, that you think of in your head. Every topic you choose has to come from the passages that you just read about helping out in your community. So for this prompt, you would have to go back into the passages and you would have to find different examples of where it talks about what work you can do in the community and how it will make a difference. Remember, this is text-based writing, so everything you write about has to come from the text, okay? That's the key point to all of this. Here's another example. Let's say that you just read 2 passages about different animal habitats. Then you were given this prompt. What would you do? So the prompt says, write to inform your reader about protecting animal habitats in the community. Now, some of you may know a lot about animal habitats, But when you go to plan for this essay, you cannot write about things that you know in your head right now. There will be some opportunity for some examples you can tell on your own, but your main topics that you write about have to come from the text. This is text-based writing. So all of your main topics that you're going to be talking about in your essay have to come from those two passages that talk about animal habitats. Okay, so I'm going to show you exactly how to do that today, how to go into the text, how to find those topics, and how to plan for your essay. Now, when planning for an essay, we use what's called an ITC outline. Now, if you did the lessons from section 1, you might remember an IRC outline. It's the exact same thing, except instead of R's, we're using T's for topics. So the I stands for introduction, the T stands for topics, and the C stands for conclusion. It's called an ITC outline. Now, I always tell everyone that you have to plan. And some people say, but I have it all in my head. I don't need to plan it out. You need to plan it out. And you'll see why in the next few lessons. Your planning is your roadmap. When you're going somewhere, your map tells you where to go every step of the way and get you to your final destination. Your planning is your roadmap for writing. It is going to get you to your final essay, and it's going to guide you every step of the way and make sure you have everything you need in your essay. So planning is super important to the writing process and writing your full essay. Now, we use the ITC outline. I'm going to show you an example. It looks like this. Again, the I stands for introduction, T1 stands for topic 1, T2 stands for topic 2, T3 stands for topic 3, and C stands for conclusion. You will also notice next to each topic, my T1, my T2, and my T3, I have an A and a B. You can see there's an A and a B next to T1, an A and a B next to T2, and an A and a B next to T3. These are my subtopics. Your A's and B's are your details or examples. You do not have A's and B's next to your I and your C. You only have your subtopics next to your T1, T2, and T3. Drawing an ITC outline does not need to be perfect. This is just your planning, but you're simply going to do I and then a line, T1 and then a line, T2 and then a line, T3 and then a line, and C and then a line. And then of course, next to your T's, you're going to have an A and a B. Now today we're going to be using the passages on alligators. There are two passages. One is called Alligators at Risk, and the other is called Alligator Habitats. Make sure you take those out. I'm going to show you what they look like on the document camera. The first one is Alligators at Risk. It is 2 pages. You have paragraph 1 and 2, and 3 and 4. That is all with the passage Alligators at Risk. The second passage is called Alligator Habitats. That is paragraphs 5, 6, 7, 8, and on the back, 9, 10, 11, 12, and 13. So those are your 2 passages on alligators. Okay, you want to make sure you have those in front of you. If you don't have these in front of you, I'm going to hold them here real quick, and you can pause the video to read each of these. That's page 1. Oh, I'm sorry. This is page 1. This is page 2. This is page 3. And this is page 4. So any of you that do not have the passages in front of you, you can pause on each of those pages and go back into the video to read them. Okay, now I'm going to give you about 15 minutes or so. I want you to try to stick within that time to read these 2 passages. If you need more time, no worries. But take time to read Alligators at Risk and Alligator Habitats on your own. So I want you to pause this video, read both passages. Okay, and then when you're done reading, come back to the video and push play. Okay, go ahead and begin reading. Okay, if you're back on the video, that means that you have read both of these passages on alligators. Okay, now I'm going to show you how to plan for this prompt. Okay, the prompt says, write an informative essay to present to your class about alligators. Use information from the passages in your essay. Now, I know that my keyword is informative, and I also know that I'm writing about alligators. And when I look at the prompt, it's just general about alligators. It's not telling me anything specific that I need to write about. Now, I have my ITC outline here. You can see I have I, T1, T2, T3, and C. Now, the first thing you can do when you're planning is fill out the I and the C. The I and the C is the main topic of the passages in the prompt. Now, both passages and the prompt are all about alligators. So on the I and the C line, I'm just going to write the main topic, which is alligators. So I'm going to write alligators on my I, and then alligators on my C. Now I have to find 3 topics about alligators. Now let's say you know a lot about alligators. You cannot put your topics from your head on here. This is text-based writing. This is your text. Your 3 topics and your A's and B's have to come from this text, okay? That is super important for you to understand. Text-based writing, your topics have to come from the text. So I want to show you how you do that. Now, each of these paragraphs, these middle paragraphs here, need to be big. They're going to be about 8 to 10 sentences long when you write them. So when you're finding topics in your text, you want to find topics that have a lot of information. So let me show you how you do this. I'm going to model to you how I plan for an essay. So as I was reading Alligators at Risk, I knew I was looking for 3 topics, and I wanted to pick 3 big topics. That way, when I write my essay, I have a lot of information to write about. As I was reading this page, I don't know if you noticed this when you were reading it, but as I was reading, I got to the end and I thought to myself, goodness gracious, both of these are about species. I have 2 full paragraphs about the different species of alligators. That's a great topic that I could write about in my essay, and I have a lot of information. If it was something that only had 1 small little paragraph, I wouldn't choose it. But this has 2 huge paragraphs about the different species of alligators. So I'm going to put a box around that area where it talked about the different species of alligators, and I'm going to label that box Topic 1, Species. You always want to box and label, because when you start writing your essay, if you didn't box and label, you're going to be rereading everywhere going, oh my goodness, where did it talk about habits, or where did it talk about species? I can't find it. But if you have it nicely boxed and labeled, you know exactly where you're going to get your information from when you're writing your T1 paragraph. Everything in this box is where you can get the information from to write your T1 paragraph. Okay, now I have my T1. Remember I talked about A's and B's on that planning sheet. Okay, we have our A's and B's. So I need to find 2, now your A's and B's are examples or details. So I need to find 2 examples or details about species that I can tell my reader more about. Remember, informative reading is informing your reader about something, okay? Informing means teaching. Okay, so if it's easier for you to understand, you can just use the word teaching. You are teaching your reader about something. You're going to be teaching them about the different species of alligators. So you need to come up with 2 details or examples that is from the text in this box that'll help you tell more about the species of alligators. So one thing I noticed was this whole paragraph was about the American alligator, and this whole paragraph was about the Chinese alligator. That's great. Those are great examples that I can use. So I'm going to underline American alligator and label that as my A, and I'm going to underline Chinese alligator and label that as my B. So now I'm going to go to my planning. And my T1 is species, so I'm going to put that on my T1. My A is American. And my B is Chinese. Now remember, planning is just jotting down your ideas. So you don't have to write the different species of alligators. You can just write species. You don't need to write American alligator, you just write American. You're going to elaborate and write when you write your essay. This can just be jotting down your ideas. Okay, so I'm done with T1. Now I have to still find 2 more topics. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my passages and I'm going to keep searching for topics that I can use in my essay. Reading, we're done with page 1. Keep reading on page 2. And as I was reading this, I right away noticed that these 2 paragraphs were about alligators being a type of reptile. So I decided to pick that as my T2, that they are a type of reptile. Sometimes subheadings like this are great because you can use those as your topic, because underneath the subheading there's a lot of information. So this subheading was about reptiles, and there was a lot of information about how alligators are a type of reptiles. This was perfect. Okay, you can see here, the title was alligators at risk. We didn't pick alligators at risk as our topic. This was about species. But for this subheading here, this worked out perfect, where underneath it talked about the different types of, or that alligators are a type of reptile. So it was a perfect topic to choose. But I have to find my A and B. My 2 details or examples that are going to help me teach my reader more about alligators being a type of reptile. So the first thing I noticed is this paragraph was about them being cold-blooded. So I'm going to choose cold-blooded as my A. And this paragraph was about alligators laying eggs. I'm going to choose eggs as my B. Okay, so when I go to my planning, I can now fill in my T2. So my T2 is that they're a type of reptile. I'm just going to put reptile. My A is that I'm going to talk about how reptiles are cold-blooded. And my B is I'm going to talk about how they lay eggs. Okay, and I still have one more topic to find. So I'm going to keep on reading. I'm on the back page, so I'm going to go to the second passage, and I'm going to keep on reading. As I was reading this page, I noticed that there were multiple paragraphs on the different habitats of alligators, and it just so happened to be what the title is too. So sometimes the titles and subheadings will help you kind of figure out where information is, but these were all about the different habitats. Oops, I gotta do that one too. So I'm going to label that T3, habitats. And then as I was reading, this whole paragraph was about the different freshwater habitats, so I'm going to pick that for my A. And then this paragraph was about the different holes that they create in their habitats. So I'm going to pick that for my B. Okay, now I want to ask you something. When I was reading this first sentence here about American alligators living in rivers, lakes, and ponds, could I have picked ponds as my T3? What do you think about that? Could that be a topic 1, the ponds? No. And the reason I brought this up is this is a good non-example. I want you to see a non-example and why you shouldn't choose that. There is only 1 sentence about ponds. I can't pick that as my topic 3. There are probably over 10 sentences about habitats. That's why I chose habitats as my topic 3, not ponds. You always want to pick topics that have a lot of information, okay? Make sure you're picking topics that you can box a lot of information. That way you have that information to use when you're writing your essay. Okay, let's go back to our planning and fill out T3. We know T3 is habitats. We're going to talk about the freshwater habitats that alligators live in. And then we're going to talk about the holes in their habitats that they create. All right, so you can see here I have my ITC outline complete. I also have boxed and labeled, so when I go back to my passages later when I'm writing my essay, I'm going to know exactly where I can pull information from. When I'm on my T1 paragraph, I know I'm pulling from this box. When I'm on my T2 paragraph, I know I'm pulling from this box. And when I'm on my T3 paragraph, I know I'm pulling from this box. I boxed and labeled. So when you hear me say box and labeled, that's what I'm referring to, is putting a box around and labeling all of your topics and your A's and B's. Now, I want to show you a few things real quick to help you kind of get an overview of this planning. Your A's and B's support your topics, okay? So just so you can kind of get a visual here, when we're talking about the different species of alligators, we're going to talk about the American species of alligators and the Chinese species of alligators. So both of these support the species. These are about the different species of alligators. Then we're talking about reptiles. We're going to talk about how reptiles are cold-blooded, and then we're going to talk about how reptiles lay eggs. Okay, so both of these are about alligators being reptiles. And then with habitats, we're going to talk about the freshwater habitats and the holes in the habitats. So both of these are about habitats. So your A's and B's are just little examples or details that tell more about your topics. Okay, and now I want to show you something else. I'm going to use 5 different colors. I want you to get a visual of this as well. So let's get green, red. Okay. Now, I told you before that your planning is your roadmap, right? So watch this. I'm going to put a pink box around here. This is going to be my first paragraph. I'm going to do an introduction about alligators. All of this is my second paragraph. Even though it says T1, it's my second paragraph when I'm writing my essay. My second paragraph is going to be about the different species of alligators, and I'm going to talk about the American alligator and the Chinese alligator. My third paragraph is my T2. I'm going to talk about alligators being a type of reptile, and I'm going to talk about how they're cold-blooded and they lay eggs. My fourth paragraph is going to be about the different habitats that alligators live in, and I'm going to talk about the freshwater habitats and the holes that they create in their habitats. This is my fourth paragraph. And my fifth paragraph, I'm going to put a box in green, is going to be my conclusion where I wrap up my essay about alligators. Now, this is your roadmap that I talked about. This is where we have laid out everything that we're going to talk about in the essays. So you're not going to have to ask your parent or your teacher and say, I don't know what to write in the second paragraph. You know exactly what to write in the second paragraph. In the second paragraph, you're writing about the different species, and you're going to talk all about the American alligator and all about the Chinese alligator. You're going to write 8 to 10 sentences about all of that. And then when you get to your third paragraph, you're not going to have to ask either, because you know you're writing about how alligators are a reptile, and you're going to write 8 to 10 sentences about them being cold-blooded and the eggs that they lay. And then your fourth paragraph, you know that you're writing about the different habitats of alligators and the freshwater holes. So you know everything you are writing about before you even start writing. This is why it's your roadmap. We are going to follow this. I'm going to come back to this over and over and over again because it's our roadmap. It's going to tell me what to write about in every single paragraph. Okay, that is how you plan for an informative essay using passages and then filling out an ITC outline. All right, now I want you to take out your climate passages. Okay, this is what they look like. Let me go over to the PowerPoint real quick. The climate passages are climates and introduction and climate zones. Okay, so go ahead and take those out. I'm also going to show them underneath the document camera real quick. So the first one is climates and introduction. Again, if for some reason you don't have these passages, you can come back to this part of the video and you can pause on each when I show each page and you can read it. So climates and introduction, that's page 1. This is page 2 of that one. And then the second passage is climate zones. That's page 1. And then page 2. Okay, so you should have climate and introduction and climate zones. Those are the 2 passages you're going to be working on for this next part of today's lesson. Okay, so first I want you to take time right now. I want you to pause the video in a few seconds, and I want you to read the climate passages on your own. Okay, so I want you to take about 15-20 minutes, read the climate passages on your own. Pause the video to do that. When you're done reading both passages, push play and come back to the lesson in the video. Okay, so go ahead, push pause and read the passages. All right, you are back, which means you have read both climate passages. Okay, climate's an introduction and climate zones. You want to make sure that you've read both of those passages because we're going to keep moving on in the lesson today. Now, it is your turn to show me what you know based on what I just went over with you in the first part of this lesson. So in the first part of the lesson, I showed you how to plan for the alligator passage set. Now you just read the climate passage set. Okay, so now I want you to be able to plan on your own. So I want you to take out the practice page for lesson 25. Okay, I'm going to show you exactly what it looks like. Let me move my markers over real quick. the practice page for lesson 25. Okay, put it on the document camera for you. Okay, there we go. Practice page for lesson 25. It looks like this. It says practice in lesson 25. And here's the prompt for the writing. Okay, it says, your teacher has asked that you write a paper about climates. Write an explanatory essay about climates. Your essay must be based on ideas and information from the passages. So, I see the keyword. Does anybody see the keyword in this prompt? The keyword is explanatory. That's how we know that it is an informative prompt. Now I have to ask myself, what is the prompt asking me to write about? It's asking me to write about climates. It doesn't say anything specific. It just tells me to write about climates. So I want you to take about 15 to 20 minutes of your own time. You may not need that much time, but this is the first time you're planning on your own, so I'm giving you a little bit extra time. And I want you to plan for the climates passages on your own, just like I did for the alligator passages. And I want you to first make sure you go through your climate passages, find the topics, box and label, just like I did. Remember, box and label. Box and label your T1, your T2, and your T3, and your A's and B's, and then fill out this climate planning ITC outline, okay? So again, pause the video, take about 15 to 20 minutes. You already read the passages, so right now you're just going back and you are boxing and labeling and finding your T1, T2, T3, and your A's and B's. So pause the video. When you're done filling out this entire ITC outline, come back and push play. Okay, you're back, which means you have completed your ITC outline for the climates passages. Now, I want to review a few things with you. You go back. Now, before I go over the climate planning and give you some example answers, I want you to do a self-assessment. Now remember, the self-assessment means you are checking your own work. This is something I want you to do before we go over the answers, but I just want you to make sure you have all the right parts. Okay, so first I want you to look at your ITC outline, and I want you to look at the I line and the C line, and I want you to make sure that you have the word climates on the I and the C line. Okay, because both passages are about climates and the prompt was. So we know that on the I and the C line, we should have the word climate or climates. Next, I want you to check that your T1, your T2, and your T3 are big topics. I want to make sure that the topics that you chose have a lot of information. Make sure that when you're looking at your boxes that you were able to find a lot of information about T1, T2, and T3. And if you need more time at any point during this self-assessment, go ahead and push pause and you can come back to it when you're done. The third thing I want you to check is I want you to check your A's and B's, your subtopics. And I want you to make sure that those are details or examples that support the topic. So whatever your A's and B's are next to T1, make sure that that supports T1. Whatever your A's and B's are next to T2, make sure that they support your T2, and same with T3. And the fourth thing I want you to check is that you box and label the information in the text. Just like I did on the alligator passages, I want you to make sure that you have the box and labeled for T1, T2, and T3. Okay, so take a few minutes. If you need extra time, pause the video, and I want you to check all four things on this self-assessment. Okay, now that you have self-assessed, I want to go over an example answer. Now, we may have all found different topics, so this is not the only right answers, okay? This is an example of a planning that you could have done for the climate. So I want to talk about this, and I'm going to switch the document camera real quick. So remember that you want to make sure first that you have the word climate on I and C. Okay, now I want to go through and model how I found all of my topics. Now, again, you may not have the same T1, T2, T3, and A's and B's. That's okay, because you can find different topics. I'm just going to show you one example, and then I also want to remind you of a few things as we're going through this. So, as I was reading, let me switch this over here for you. Okay, can you see all that? All right. Now, as I was reading, there's a few things that I noticed that I could choose as my topic 1, topic 2, and topic 3. But I wanted to make sure that I was picking big topics. Okay, so the first thing that I did was I was going through and I was reading. This talked about the people that study the climate. This one talked about how it changes, keeping track of the climate, and then it went into latitude, altitude, and distance. So the one thing that I noticed that stuck out to me when I was reading this was this paragraph here talked about the different factors, and then it went into some of those factors here. And I thought that's a lot of information that I could use in my essay. So I decided to choose factors, which is all of this and this, as my T1. So I'm going to do both of those, and that's my T1 is going to be factors. Okay, because right away, you know, there was a little paragraph on this, but this one, it talks about the factors and then it went into detail about them. That had a lot of information. So that's why I picked the factors as my T1. And then I picked, oh, I'm sorry, it's actually all of this. That shouldn't be there. All of this is the factor because it's 5 factors and this goes into the factors. Now, I picked latitude as my A and I picked distance as my B. Why do you think I didn't pick altitude as my A or B? It would have made more sense if I picked latitude as my A and altitude as my B. But why do you think I skipped over that and I decided to pick distance as my B? Anyone have any idea? I'll tell you why. It's because altitude only had 2 little sentences. Now, if that was my only option, I would have picked it. But I had another factor here that had a lot more information. So that's why I skipped over altitude, and I picked latitude as my A and distance as my B. So when I went back to my planning sheet, I put factors, and then I put latitude as my A and distance as my B. And then I had to keep reading through the text until I found a topic 2. So I kept reading. This had a little bit about mountain ranges, a tiny bit about wind. I didn't want to pick that. As I kept reading here, it talked about getting into different climate zones. And it had a lot of information about tropical climates. And I told you before, a little secret is you can use these subheadings as your topics too. So because underneath the subheadings, there's going to be a lot of information about that. So this said tropical climates, and then underneath it, there was a lot of information about tropical climates. And then on this one, it talked about dry climates and then had a lot of information. There's a little bit about moderate and a little bit about polar. So I decided to choose tropical climates as my T2. And there's not a whole lot of information, but I only have a few choices, so I'm going to choose that one because it's that one, and then I'm going to choose dry for T3 because there's not a lot of information in these. So I'm going to pick tropical climates as my T2. I'm going to talk about that as one of the climate zones. And in the first couple sentences, it talks about how there's a lot of sunlight. So I'm going to talk about that as my A. And in the second couple of sentences, it talks about it being ideal habitat for plants and animals. So I'm going to pick habitat for my B. So when I get to my T2 paragraph, I'm going to talk about the tropical climate zone, and I'm going to talk about the sun and the habitats. So when I come back to my page, and I'm going to show you with this one up close so you can see both of them. My T2 is tropical. My A is the sunlight, and my B is habitat. And then if I keep reading, remember, I only have a few more topics that I can pick from, and I'm obviously going to pick the biggest one. So I'm going to talk about the dry climate zone as my T3. Okay, And then as I was reading this one, pretty much the first 3 or 4 sentences was about that there was a little bit of rain. So I chose that as my A. And then the next 3 or 4 sentences was about the cactus. So I picked that as my B. Okay, so with this paragraph, I'm going to talk about the dry climate zone. I'm going to talk about that there's little rain and the cactus plants. So when I go back to my planning, I'm going to write dry. Okay, and look back here. I'm going to write little rain for my A. And then the cactus for my B. Okay, and just as a review, just to remind you of how important this planning is, remember that this is going to be my first paragraph, introducing climate. All of this is going to be my second paragraph about the factors, the latitude and distance factors. This is all going to be my third paragraph about the tropical zone, the sun and the habitats in the tropical zone. My fourth paragraph is going to be all about the dry zone, how there's little rain and the cactus plants. And then my fifth paragraph is going to be my conclusion about climates. Okay, so this is my roadmap and how I'm going to plan out my entire essay. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint here and finish our lesson for today. I want you to take out that climate ITC, you should still have it out, that we just went over together, and this is your time to reflect. Remember, reflection is a huge part of the writing process. This is your time to help yourself identify your strengths and weaknesses and then grow as a writer, because you want to do better each time you write. So I want you to look at your climate planning, and I want you to ask yourself a few questions. You don't need to write the answers down. You can just think about it in your head, make a mental note. But I want you to start with, ask yourself, what did I do well? Okay, ask yourself that and think about your planning. Think about what you did well on. Maybe you did really well with picking 3 topics. Think about what you did well on. Then I want you to ask yourself, what did I forget? Take a minute or so. If you need more time, you can pause the video and come back and push play. But think about, what did you forget? Maybe you forgot to box and label. Maybe you forgot to find your A's and B's. Think about that and make a note, because you don't want to make the same mistake next time. So you want to learn from this and grow. And the last question, I want you to ask yourself, what was hard? Maybe there was a part of it that was hard for you. Maybe you struggle with finding topic 3. Maybe you struggle with finding A's and B's. Whatever that is, make a note of it, because I want you to be able to ask questions to your parent or your teacher after, so you can make sure that it's not hard for you anymore and they can help you with finding those topics in A's and B's or whatever that you struggle with. If you need more time to reflect, go ahead and pause the video and you can push play when you're done. The next part is revising. This is your opportunity to make your paper the best it can be before you turn it into your parent or teacher. So I want you to start with asking yourself, did I forget something? If you forgot something, maybe you forgot your A's and B's. Maybe you forgot to box and label. No problem. Go ahead and add it now. Take the time now to revise before you turn your paper in. Then I want you to look through your paper and see if you made any mistakes. And if you did, fix it. No worries. This is your time to revise and fix those mistakes. And then last, I always want you to check for capitalization, spelling, punctuation, and clarity. And clarity just means, does it make sense? Is it easy to understand? Take time to revise. If you need more time, go ahead and press pause and then play when you're done. I'm going to leave you today with a quote. I actually really love this quote. It says, no matter how many mistakes you make or how slow you progress, you're still way ahead of everyone who isn't trying. And what this means really is that you're going to make mistakes, and you may not get it as fast as you want, but you are way ahead of everyone else who isn't even trying. You're taking the first steps, you're trying, you're becoming a better writer. And I will tell you right now that all the mistakes are going to make you 10 times better, because you're going to learn from them. Okay, so that's just part of the process. So today, the lesson was on planning for informative prompts. You've now learned how to identify keywords, analyze prompts, and plan. We learned how to use text, box, and label. There was so much in this lesson, and I'm so proud of how well you did. So enjoy the rest of your day, and I will see you in the next lesson.